Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to announce that today, as we are discussing combat-tested courage and displaying character in crisis, you're going to get to hear directly from the leaders of our Air Force and our Space Force so they can share their wisdom, their insights, their journey, and as well as their expectations for you as you'll be joining our Air Force and Space Force. So please join me as we greet Chief Wilsbach, CMSgt Wolfe, Lieutenant General Gagnon, and CMSgt Bentivegna.
Please.
That's bright lights. Yeah. Gentlemen, what an honor to be on stage with you all. Let's get right into it. First question, what does moral courage look like for junior officers making decisions in difficult environments where information may be incomplete, contested, or delayed?
You want to go first?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's really an honor to be here with you. I'd like to thank General Bauernfeind for inviting us. Appreciate the NCLS committee for putting the event together. And in a few short months, for some of you, you will find yourselves leading. And the Air Force Academy isn't just a regular university, as you know. If it was, it'd be easy. But it's not. And the reason it's not easy is because in a few months, you are going to be leading. And you may be leading in combat. And what I'll share with you is the purest form of meritocracy is in combat. And second place is dead last. And so for that reason, you better have moral courage. And to get to the gist of your question, it's pretty simple. Moral courage looks the same whether you're a second lieutenant or whether you're a four-star general. It's doing the right thing whether nobody's looking or whether everybody's looking.
So I'm Greg Gagnon. I'm from the Space Force. Unlike the chief, I'm not the chief of the service. I'm sort of our equivalent of CMSgt, which is the commander of ACC. It's great to be here with you today. I would add one thing to the chief's comment. You're not going to get moral courage on the day you need moral courage.
Yeah, true.
You need to do it every day. You need to do it in the small things, like correcting your teammates. And if you continue to do that, and you correct your team, and you correct your organization, when the time comes that you have to look up and correct up, you'll be ready. Because traits, over time, become habit. And habit, over time, becomes character.
Yeah, I would just echo everything that they say, about moral courage. And when you think about whether your life here at the Academy, or if you're an ROTC cadet, or from another sister service academy, the day-to-day trials and tribulations that you go through is the exercise, it's the sets and reps that you need to hone your moral courage. Because just like General Gagnon said, it's not like you flip a switch and the day you need it, you have it. You have to practice it every single day, which is part of the reason the environment that you're in right now is set up the way it is. It's to prepare you for the day when you absolutely need it, when it matters the most.
Hi, Chief Wolfe. It's great to be here with all of our great future leaders, and I know there's a lot of our enlisted leaders that are in the room too. I think our 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year, some of them are here today, so really great to be here and share some thoughts with you. I would tag on that when I've seen the decision-making processes happening at the different levels of command that I've been able to serve at, usually when you're talking about a moral dilemma or a moral decision that needs to be made, it's when you boil it down, it usually ends up being a pretty easy what to do, right? That is usually pretty apparent when you're talking about a moral decision. because we've given you all the tools you need to know right from wrong. I mean, it's written all over the walls of this institution everywhere what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, the name of this symposium is pretty, pretty telling on what we're supposed to do. The hard part is having the discipline to execute that, because just because the decision is obvious doesn't mean it's easy, because there could be second and third order implications on some of the decisions that are made that aren't super desirable. There's things that are hard to carry out and hard to make happen over the long term. So having that courage up front and then having the discipline to actually make that right decision is the harder part. But that discipline gives you freedom. It gives you freedom from negative consequences later on. It gives you freedom to operate. So I'd say remember that any of these kind of leadership decisions and really everything that we do in our institution is about discipline.
Do you want a story?
Yes, sir.
So I'm in Afghanistan, and I have a boss that significantly outranks me, and we're walking down the hallway. Love my boss, great boss. And he made a totally inappropriate comment. And there's other people walking around the hallways, completely inappropriate comment that we all know he knew, we all knew he shouldn't have made. And I grabbed him by the arm, and I pulled him into a room, just me and him. Now, I'm significantly junior to this person. And I go, boss, you cannot talk like that. You need to check your words. That is inappropriate. What if one of those other airmen or soldiers would have heard that? You have no defense. And he goes, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. And then we walked out. But when I grabbed him by the arm, I was like, this could be the end of my career, right? But it's do the right thing, right? Because we cannot have our leaders being inappropriate around our subordinates.
I had a similar situation. I was a major at the time. I was overseas, and 𝐒𝐚𝐧𝐢𝐶 said something. I brought him in. I told him what I thought. He yelled at me because he was a yeller. And then I thought I was in trouble. The end of that assignment, I was his #1 officer.
Yeah. Because he could trust you.
Yep, absolutely, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our second question. As we mark 250 years of American military history, what timeless leadership traits have mattered most in combat, and which are newly essential?
All right. So I can barely hear you because I got hearing aids, but I think you said, hey, what mattered in the old days and what matters now and what holds over time. I'm going to tell you, training matters, and you can't train on the day of the war. And why does training matter? Because that's what allows you to pause, breathe, and then execute. Pause, breathe, and then execute. Also in Afghanistan at Bagram, I watched the lieutenant colonel kind of lose it. Okay, I won't get too specific, but like lost it in his own squadron at the duty desk when the building next to us was on fire and blowing up. And his whole squadron saw that, and the second in command was the calm voice. I was just visiting through. And you gotta keep you calm. What keeps you calm is training. And guess what? Everyone's afraid. Like the whole you don't get afraid, you get afraid. You take a breath, and then training shows up. But if you don't train your unit and you don't train yourself, training don't show up. And it's too late to start it then. But.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I would share is that the way you stay calm is you have credibility and you've done the training, and you're not panicking because you've got confidence, and you can fall back on what you know. And to your point, I hearken back to 9/11. I was a squadron commander at the time. And of course, buildings are falling down in New York. Of course, the Pentagon had been hit. The crash in Pennsylvania had occurred. And it was a few hours after that. And all of the fighter squadrons were loading up live weapons and patrolling the airspace. I happened to be in Alaska. And so no one ever thought about loading up live weapons and patrolling our own airspace with potential of shooting down an airliner. But that's what we were being told to get ready to do on that day. and the maintenance officer of the squadron was having a mental meltdown. And he's a major, and he was treating all of the enlisted members on the flight line, our maintenance people, really poorly. And the next day, I told him to clear out his desk, because you cannot have people mistreating others, especially in combat. And we got a new maintenance officer. So the calmness in the crisis matters, and your people will line up and follow you if you stay calm. But if you lose it, they won't follow.
You know, the chief just said it. He used the word credibility. And I would say from a leadership trait, right, over 250 years, one that it was important when the nation was born to today and tomorrow, from leadership quality is going to be credibility. You know, there's the authority that is inherent in your rank, but then there's the influence and authority that you've earned. And you got to have credibility. As leaders, do you keep your word? Are you reliable? Do you own your mistakes? Those all add to credibility. We needed it yesterday, we need it today, and we're going to need it from you in the future. Be credible leaders. Extremely important.
I guess I'll take a little bit different approach on answering this. I think that there is a tendency sometimes, if you haven't been able to detect the difference between at least this side of the stage and maybe this side of the stage, there's a little bit of an age gap in what we've got up here, just a touch. I meant this side and this side. And you know, there's a tendency, I think, sometimes as you get older to look at the younger generation and think, man, like, hard to understand, like, what does that word mean that you're using? What is this app that you have that I don't know anything about? And there's these kind of like cultural barriers that we have between age groups. But I always try to remind myself that the human being's not had a software upgrade in 2,000 years, right? We are more the same than we are different. So this leadership of the past and leadership of now and into the future, I don't think it's as different as maybe we would like to make it out to be. I think people want to know what's expected of them. I think that they want to do a good job. Like, I don't think you'd be at the Air Force Academy if you were an underachiever. For the enlisted folks that are in the room, you're here because you want to do an amazing work and contribute to something bigger than yourself. I think people want to know that they can have a life outside of wearing the uniform too, right? And we've got to provide them with an environment where there's a series of trade-offs. Sometimes we're going to need you to do way more work than there are hours in the day, and then we need you to take a knee, right? I can tell you this about your Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He takes his leave, right? We need you to do the same thing when you're out there. There's a lot about what we do that there are no generational differences in, and I think that if the more we can remember that, the more we can make it so that when we're talking, when the older people are talking, the younger people aren't hearing, I don't think they trust us because they don't understand what's going on in our kind of, our culture at our level. I think that's a dangerous way to operate, and I always try to listen and try to understand what's happening and then communicate in a way that that's beneficial to both of us.
In a future fight where communications may be degraded or destroyed, how much decision authority do you expect to be pushed to the tactical level of leadership?
As a former CFAC, we pushed down the number of decisions, as many as we could, to the lowest possible level. But what I'll share with you is my demand and my requirement is that we don't lose calm. And the reason is because in today's environment, unlike the environment that I grew up in, where if you found a target, you could shoot at it and you could do everything yourself. You could guide the weapon into that target and you didn't need anybody else's help. Those days are pretty much over. We can still do that, but for very highly defended targets, you can't get close enough to be able to do that yourself, and so you need the network to be able to guide that weapon in. Before you even shoot that weapon, you need to know where that target is, and you need COM to be able to know where it is, and then perhaps get the guidance to go get that target. So, and then it's a stacked effect. So there's cyber effects and space effects and electronic warfare effects, and there's air-to-air and maybe air-to-surface, and perhaps there's a submarine or a ship involved. There may be some surface-to-surface fires from the Army, and all of those effects have to hit the target all at the same time. So it takes synchronization, and if you don't have COM, you're not synchronizing. So you can't do any of all the stuff that I just described if you don't have COM. So my requirement to the service, and a lot of it goes over to the Space Force because we get a lot of those comms through space, is that we have to have unbreakable comms. Otherwise, we're not going to be very effective in the battle space.
Other militaries other than ours are also using networks to extend their range and extend their reach. The most profound change probably in the last 90 years since we saw the rearmament of Germany in the 1930s is the rapid pace of change in both the deployment of kit and the purchasing of kit and the networking of kit of the People's Liberation Army. The People's Liberation Army is the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. They are probably the second most powerful military in the world. They have moved from being able to influence their near abroad by 100 miles, 200 miles, maybe 20 years ago, to now influencing at the 1,000-mile range. They have dependencies on these networks as well. I will tell you that one advantage we have over foreign militaries is actually our outstanding airmen and guardians. Our power is our people. When we planned and trained to fight the Russians, or the Soviets, that they were sometimes called when we started, one of their constraints was that they were centrally controlled and centrally executed. So if you could cut off a unit and isolate them, they would no longer exercise the initiative. They would hold and wait for orders. That is generally the communist approach to warfighting. That's one of the reasons you saw that Russian basically armored vehicles all stacked up from Kyiv going into Belarus without knowing what to do, right? American forces are generally empowered. They are empowered and they are proactive, and they execute the principle of war that we call initiative. They do that because we train people at your level, when you're about 2 years away from being the lieutenants, who are gonna either run the weapon system, run the crew, and run the force. Continue to lean forward, continue to empower, because in war things break and you can't stand still.
I would say from a Space Force perspective, General Gagnon, as the commander of Combat Forces Command, focus on the unit of action, right? Our combat squadrons, which are broken into our combat crews, which are led, right, by a young lieutenant or a captain and a non-commissioned officer. In the mission command, right, how we're trying to train them, just like the chief said, right, multi-domain operations at the speed of which, right, we're going to ask these individuals to make decisions. They just can't rely on a checklist or for permission or clarification from several echelons of command, right? So to answer your question, what do we need, right? It's got to be in the fog and friction and the speed of which combat is going to be like in this century. Individuals will understand mission command, understand how to do calculated risk, understand their part in the larger piece of whatever the objective is. And that's a lot of responsibility and pressure. But that's going back to what General Gagnon said, why training has got to be intense. It's got to be repetitive so that when you executing mission command, you're comfortable, confident, and credible as you do so.
I think, go ahead, sir. One of the words that you used in your question was future fight. I think that's the two words you used there. I've tried over the last few years to kind of eliminate those words from my vocabulary because, and I know what you mean. You're talking about like a time, out in the future when we're kinetic and there's things that you can see happening, and there's lives lost, and there's there's a global or a regional war going on. But folks, if you don't think that the fight isn't happening right now as we're sitting here today, you're mistaken, right? It's happening. Go talk to our folks that are in our cyber offensive and defensive squadrons. Go talk to those folks that these two fine gentlemen lead in our space operations units. Folks, the fight is now. It's happening now, and it's a fight to not get to the spot that I just described at the beginning. This is about deterrence. That's what our whole job is to be so ready and so obviously better than everyone else that they never want to go out into the parking lot after school, right? That's it. They just don't want to do it. So that's what all of our operations are about right now, is about showing that deterrent value to make sure that we never have to get into that fight. But that if we do, we are so ready to go that it'll be over quickly. Pushing authority down to the lower level, absolutely imperative. We had some exercises in Guam a few years ago. The boss got to go out and see it live, where we had small units operating to turn aircraft and get sorties into the air. And these operations were led where they would normally be led probably by like a chief maintenance, squadron superintendent, squadron senior enlisted leader, and a probably at least a major, probably a lieutenant colonel would be out on the island running this operation. The two senior people on this island were a captain and a tech sergeant, and they were doing it, and they were making decisions, and they were doing it with commander's intent from the higher level, and they were making things happen. We've got to do this in garrison as well, right? We can't have administrative policy and burden on our folks that makes it so they have to go mother may I for every little thing that they need to do, and then expect when they go into combat they're going to be trained and ready to make decisions that everybody's been making above them, and they've had no opportunity to make those decisions themselves at a lower level and learn from them as they understand the system. So this is an imperative. We've got to push authority down to the lowest level.
Yeah. So I'll just add a couple things. So I talked to one of your graduates from about a year and a half ago. So he's at Peterson. I worked out with him on Wednesday morning. It's Lieutenant Gallard. So him and his squadron, I showed up and worked out with him, and they really put a beating on me. He was the defensive back for you guys on the football team, so he's really fit. And I swear only the fit people showed up at PT that day. So I felt a little behind. But I said, hey, I'm going back to your alma mater to talk to them. What do you want to tell them? Because you're like 2 years older than them or 3 years older than them. And he said, be where your feet are. Okay? Be where your feet are. Now, I see General Thompson out there in the audience, and I know he's one of your instructors. And I read the 20 questions they told us we were going to get. You guys and gals are asking National War College questions, okay? These are great questions. But for the next 7 years, be where your feet are. The two things you need to focus on is building rock-solid character and becoming extremely tactically proficient. In the United States Air Force, as a junior officer, your job is to learn your weapon system and learn your unit. Learn your weapon system and learn your unit. In the Space Force, it's the same thing. And the level of responsibility that's going to be placed on you in very short order is something like Captain Lane. Captain Lane graduated here in 2019. I talked to her yesterday because I was catching up with her. She's been a missile warning officer who's been intimately involved in the last 2 years of activities in the Middle East. She was in the Middle East at the 𝐒𝐞𝐽 when that 100 missile barrage went into Israel. She helped do the missile warning to the Israelis and our fielded forces. She did that with an enlisted member of the Canadian Navy as they did missile warning out of the 𝐒𝐽. After that deployment, she came home and she was up at Buckley. And then we had the next missile warning event where we had 200 missiles fired by the Iranians at U.S. forces and forces in theater. And she was able, between the first rotation and the second rotation, to build a tactic inside our missile warning that increased warning time by like 80 to 82%, right? Because she was making sure that she was the most effective, tactically proficient person on our weapon system. That's how she added value to the much greater team. So in the next 5 or 6 years, you should be focused on character and focusing on understanding your weapon system. You should be asking the toughest questions like you wrote down to those field grade officers. They should get confused and nervous, and they should come to the generals and the chiefs, okay?
Yeah, great words.
Gentlemen, what failures in training or exercises most concern you today, and how can cadets prepare to lead despite inevitable friction and mistakes in combat?
Yeah, I don't actually get too wrapped up on failures. In fact, I talk about this a lot with risk taking, and clearly we don't want to kill somebody, we don't want to crash an airplane, we don't want to break a piece of equipment we can't replace. But besides that, I'm okay with the failures, because it's the failures where you learn the biggest lessons. And I'll share with you a story. I've told this story so many times, and some of you may have heard it. But when I was the Pacific Air Force's commander, I told all of the wing commanders to take risk. Because if you don't take risk, the adversary is going to pass you by. So you need to be taking some risk. And so we were doing an agile combat employment exercise. Do you know about agile combat employment? Okay, so you know. So the exercise was 2 F-35s were going to take off out of Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska, do a mission, and then they were going to land at Elmendorf, about 250 miles apart. But the exercise part of it was the 2 pilots in the jets had to turn the airplanes themselves. Now, normally we have maintenance crews that refuel it, do the post-flight inspection, pre-flight inspection, check the oil, all those things. The pilots had to do it themselves. Well, on this particular day, it was snowing. So one of the pilots gets out, takes his helmet off and puts it on the canopy bow, gets out of the jet and lowers the canopy onto the helmet. Now, it's a $500,000 helmet and it's $1 million canopy. Both were broken. And the wing commander called me and said, "Hey, boss, you remember when you said to take risk?" And I said, "What happened?" And he told me the story, and I said, "Okay, fix the canopy, buy the pilot a new helmet, and press. Don't do that again, but we've learned our lesson, right?" And I know that when I was a squadron commander or wing commander, if I had just burned up $1.5 million in one event, there would have been hell to pay over that. But the leadership example there is, if you tell people to take risk and then when they have a failure, you punish them for it, the lesson learned on their side will be there will not be any more risk, there will not be any more failures, and perhaps we won't be learning the lessons that we need to be learning.
Similar to the general, I don't worry about the unit level mistakes, because the way we've created squadrons in the Space Force and in the Air Force is that they're learning organizations, and that's what makes them successful. When you plan, brief, execute, and debrief, you are institutionalizing what's called continuous learning. And there's a lot of MBA stuff on this, but that's actually part of our DNA. That's very positive. What I worry about in exercises is whether we have negative learning at the larger scale level. And I just recently, I'm going to use this talking point next week when we're in Denver. Of the 81 external exercises my command supported in 2025, 72 of them assumed we had space superiority in them, and that was never trained. And that, unfortunately, for the Department of the Air Force and the Joint Force, is literally negative learning. Mm-hmm. It's negative learning against the war we need to plan for, because the largest space force in the world is not ours. The largest space force in the world is actually the Chinese. And we need to gain the high ground, which today is no longer the air. The high ground is space. And at our level, when we're in the boardrooms, it's the same. You see him shaking his head? Every service chief's doing the same thing. They all get it. But it's hard to turn the whole ship to understand that.
Yeah, I've said that there's no air superiority without space superiority first. Yeah. That's a fact. And in fact, none of the other services can do what they need to do unless you have space superiority. It's so critical.
I would say from one of the things that concern me, failures in training and exercises. It's fear of failing, right? That's a failure. Just like the chief said, right? Is individuals when they're in training not pushing the boundaries and taking the risks they need to learn in that environment. Check rides do not have to be 100%. Like, you've got to be able to put yourself through the sets and reps Figure out what your left and right limits are, and don't be afraid of failing forward and learning. That's the whole reason we have training. So don't be afraid to fail in training. That's your learning sandbox. That's what you have to do. The other thing, and this is what General Gagnon talked about, be demanding customers. If the training that you're being given, you know there's fallacies that are in the scenario, there's assumptions that are being made that you know aren't true, push back on them, question them. Be demanding warfighters so that the training you get is realistic, it prepares you and the men and women that you lead for when the warfight comes. And make sure that we are a credible deterrent to whoever wishes us harm. So be demanding customers. Don't be afraid of failure in the training environment. That's where you're going to learn.
Yeah, I'm worried about those same mistakes that everybody's talking about here. I'm more worried, though, about things that we call mistakes that are actually violations of our value system, right? That's not a mistake. That's a you knew better and you decided to anyways violate our agreed upon, what we've decided as a team value system. So super important as you guys go through this character and leadership symposium to remember that that's the groundwork that gets laid to make it so that when you do have to make those decisions, you already know the lens that you're supposed to be looking at it through.